So going into round 6, I'm now on 2 out of 5 after drawing round 5. And in this game, I'm playing FIDE Master Robert Shlyatinko, who is from Southern California. And I think actually Robert ended up getting an IM norm in this tournament. I actually thought he was an IM already, but no, I think at the time of this game officially he was FM, but we'll probably get the title very soon because his FIDE rating is very close to 2400, and yeah, I mean he's still young and improving. But anyway, in this game he goes e4, and this was actually a bit of a surprise because he's usually a d4 player, so I was expecting mainly a King's Indian. I don't think I even considered him playing e4 very much. So I didn't really know what to expect, but I decided, okay, like he's not usually an e4 player. He doesn't have a ton of experience in the Sicilian. Let's play the Sicilian. Even if he prepared something, you know, whatever. I mean, I have more experience here. I'm happy to play the positions. The openings I play are fine, right? So not really worried too much about the preparation. So knight f3, e6, and he goes c3 here. And okay, once he played this one, I think I felt much more comfortable because the c3 Sicilian definitely not the most dangerous approach for black. I would have been more worried about, you know, some open Sicilian, something really sharp. But c3, so I stick to my usual line here, knight f6 attacking the pawn, e5, knight d5, and here white goes bishop c4. And usually white plays d4 in this position, and then black takes and plays for d6, and we get a very interesting structure where white has more space, but black has this nice d5 square, and I would say things are relatively balanced. But here he plays a little bit different with bishop c4, kind of delaying the d-pawn push. But I actually had a game not too long ago with this exact line, so I was pretty familiar with the details here, and I didn't think it's really that dangerous for black. So d6, I'm just challenging the e5 pawn, castles. Takes on e5, knight e5, bishop e7. Now white goes d4. He can throw in bishop b5 check, but it doesn't really accomplish much after knight d7. I'm just going to go a6 and force white to trade pieces eventually. And yeah, essentially black has no problems. So d4, cd4, cd4, castles, knight c3. And yeah, now again we get kind of a typical position with the isolated queen pawn. With white's last move, knight c3, he's of course encouraging black to take so he can get hanging pawns. And this is definitely a very playable position. I don't think it's exactly my favorite because if I go knight d7 or knight c6 here, white can play like f4 and really cement the knight on e5. So I decide just to play this move, knight c6, immediately. And this is something I looked at before. Because at first glance, it's not exactly clear why black would want to allow this trade and isolate our own c-pawn. But the point is that black is one day just going to play c5, maybe queen b6 first, maybe a5, bishop a6, bishop b7. Actually have just like a ton of moves to make. And the c-pawn is really not weaker than white's d-pawn. And white doesn't have any obvious ways of targeting it either. So black is actually totally fine here. Like queen b6, rook d8, bishop f6. I can put pressure on the d4 pawn. I can also just trade this one off with c5 at some point in the future once everything is kind of developed. And in general, black is, I think, doing just fine. Question about the hanging pawns. Why is this position good for white? I don't think this position is necessarily like great for white, but I think it's a decent version. Black is just not really super well developed to put pressure on the pawns so quickly, and white's going to get f4 in, maybe bishop d3, and so on. So I would say it's pretty double-edged. So knight c6, and yeah, if white plays f4 here, well then they have a lot of issues with queen b6, and this d4 pawn is weak if we haven't traded on c3 yet. So I think this is kind of the main reason why black doesn't really want to trade on c3 too quickly sometimes. Yeah, now my opponent, I think, spent a bit of time and ends up going bishop takes d5. So giving up the light square bishop, But on e takes d5, the idea is to play knight takes c6, bc6, and we get this position. And here, okay, structurally black is definitely worse, because now white's d-pawn is not isolated anymore, but my c-pawn is definitely a weakness. But I feel like this should be compensated by me having the two bishops, especially this light square bishop is a good piece. So I definitely didn't feel like I'm at all worse here. So bishop f4, bishop e6. I spent a bit of time in this position trying to figure out like what to do exactly. Eventually I just decided let's just put the bishop on the most natural square and not overthink it. And in general, my long-term plan was to just very, very slowly improve the position. Like go rook e8, maybe bishop f8, maybe even f6, bishop f7. Just kind of like tuck the bishops back, connect the rook somehow with queen to d7, and eventually just try to use my two bishops. Now I played rook c1. Now I was really expecting knight a4 in this position because I thought white should be trying to stop black from pushing c5, which rook c1 doesn't really do. So I think with knight a4, I think white gets slightly better chances here, I would say, compared to the game. I still think black is totally fine. I can go rook e8, queen a5. There's really not a whole lot for white in the position. But after rook c1, c5, I really felt like I'm just equalizing on the spot, because I'm able to trade off my weakness. Okay, granted, I'm left with my own isolated queen pawn now, but with number one, this pawn being a pass pawn, white doesn't have the pawn on e3 to set up an easy blockade. I think that's a good version for black. And the second thing is, of course, the two bishops are still very, very active here. And if I'm able to push d4 and open up the bishops, then black can even easily be better. Now at this point, white could have forced a draw with knight takes d5 if he wanted to, taking the pawn and hitting the bishop here. And I think I have different ways of making the draw. Like I can just recapture right away. And this opposite color bishop endgame, I think, would be pretty drawish on rook a5, like bishop c4, for example. But even simpler after knight takes d5 would probably be to just take on f2 with check. Rook takes f2, queen takes d5. And okay, material is equal, opposite color bishops. I can't imagine either side really, really being worse here in the long run. And he ends up playing knight a4, which is definitely more ambitious. Bishop e7, and now bishop e5. So very logical move. With this one, he's trying to control the d4 square and create a blockade. Maybe play like queen d4 and possibly put some pressure here. Without this move, white would really have to be careful that he's not allowing me to play d4 myself, after which I think black's position would be quite nice. And yeah, I was really unhappy with my next move, rook to c8. Because to me it felt like a position where I can do almost anything. Like I felt like I have so many normal moves here, like queen d7, queen a5, rook e8, rook c8. All of these moves look totally fine for me, and somehow I just picked rook c8 almost at random. You know, just thinking like, okay, let's trade off a pair of rooks, get my other rook into d8, and to me this looked totally fine. But I totally didn't realize that there are some tactics in the position that I need to watch out for. So white goes queen d4, f6, you know, this was my intention, and I'm not really worried about playing f6 here because I can tuck my bishop back, and this bishop can drop back to f8, and everything is really solid. But now rook takes c8. And, okay, I'm not in time to take on e5, so white takes here, and takes here, and is ending up in exchange. And the problem for me, if I take queen takes c8, which is the most logical recapture, white has this move queen takes a7, where he snags a pawn and hits the bishop on e7. And so if I just give him a tempo to save his bishop, I just lost the pawn for nothing. And now he has two protected passers on the queen side. So I tried to make this work. When white played rook takes c8, I like paused and realized, uh-oh, like what have I done? So I realized like if queen takes c8, I might be losing the pawn. I tried to make it work, but I was a little bit concerned here because queen a7, I do have this move queen d7, which looks nice because if white trades queens, then they're ending up with two pieces under attack, and big problems. Knight b6, bishop b5, and then the rook is hit, and the bishop is hit as well. The problem with queen d7 is white continues bishop d4, defending the queen and saving the bishop. And I continue the line. Queen takes a7, bishop takes a7, rook a8. If not this move, I'm just down a pawn. So rook a8. But then white has bishop c5. And yeah, I wasn't sure what to do, because if I take, then knight takes c5, hits the bishop. I don't have time to win my pawn back. And if I go rook takes a4, bishop takes e7, rook takes a2, white has bishop a3 at the end of the line. And I remember seeing this position for quite some time and trying to figure out whether I'm holding here or if I'm worse or just like straight up losing, because it actually looks kind of scary at first with the rook on a2 being stuck. Now, I don't know if white actually has a way to like win the rook. I can always push d4 and keep it protected, but I didn't really like the idea of having to play this endgame where my rook is kind of caught. And okay, I mean, only white can be better here, I felt like in the long run. Objectively, I mean, the engine says it's all drawn. You know, black is fine. White doesn't have a way to exploit this. But yeah, from afar, I mean, it wasn't. I felt like I had a comfortable position. You know, why am I going into this endgame where I might have a hard time holding? The engine also shows black can maybe play just king f7 here, allowing bishop a3, and then a move like d4. And although I don't win my pawn back, I mean, white's forced to play rook a1 just to defend this guy. And actually, white has a very hard time making progress here. So this would be, I think, like kind of like a positional draw almost, because just no way for white to move anything on the queen side without losing material. He could try to bring the king in, but yeah, hard to make meaningful progress. So okay, this one was objectively equal as well, but yeah, from afar, from this position, I don't know, it was hard to go for it. So that's why I don't like rook c8, because I mean, I just allowed these difficulties for no reason. I think rook e8 probably would have been much better, just defending the bishop, allowing me to go bishop f8 whenever I want, and here I think black experiences no issues whatsoever. So yeah, kind of a sloppy move on my end. Queen d4, f6 takes, and I end up taking with the bishop, which is really not ideal because my bishop was already developed. It doesn't want to be on c8, it wants to be on e6 and f7. But, well, okay, I decide to take this one so that queen is still defending the bishop. So now there's no queen takes a7. So bishop f4. And yeah, at this point I start to get kind of upset with myself because I start to not like my position because this a pawn is still hanging. And the d pawn is potentially weak as well. Like white can go rook d1, knight c3, and now just go after the pawn. Now black's position still is not that bad, and I'm happy that I kind of managed to figure out a nice way to develop here. So I go queen d7. Not a very obvious move, but I'm defending the pawn on a7, and I want to kind of prepare to put the bishop on b7. It wasn't the only move. Queen a5 was possible as well. And then with the idea of bringing the bishop back to e6. Not sure what exactly I didn't like here, but as soon as I play bishop e6, I'm always like a little bit worried about the bishops on the e file. But this was possible too. Anyways, I go queen d7, rook c1, rook e8, and I'm just trying to kind of fix my position. Rook c7 here I think is not really a problem because I have queen e6 at minimum, or queen f5, and white has back rank issues. So h3. Bishop f8, knight c3, bishop b7, and here if queen takes a7, I'm pushing d4, and if rook d1, there's queen c6, so this one would not be very good for white. I think just losing on the spot. And if the knight has to move, then okay, I get queen d5, and I think black is doing extremely well. So rook d1 first. I played rook to d8. Now actually white could have considered snagging this pawn. I still get d4, but at least white could play queen b6 and kind of keep my queen from being able to reach this diagonal. Actually, I don't think I really considered this one during the game, but I guess intuitively I felt like I should have enough as long as I get my d-pawn running with the two bishops opened up. To me, I guess I just wasn't too worried about it here. But definitely this would have been interesting, an interesting try. Instead, I think he plays more sensibly. He goes bishop e3. Now I finally play a6, queen b6, and white still has a little bit of pressure here, especially he would really love to be able to trade the dark squared bishops and then blockade the pawn and then just play like good knight against bad bishop. So that's something I definitely have to watch out for. And here I decide to just avoid this blind by playing bishop d6. So now in case of any kind of bishop c5, I can always get my bishop out like e5 or bishop b8 and just avoid the trade altogether. So now with bishop d6, I'm planning like bishop b8. Of course, d5 pawn is not hanging here because I have takes, and bishop h2 check, and the rook is lost. So queen b3. I play bishop e5, bishop b6, and rook c8. And actually, this is a very funny moment because, I mean, at first glance, it looks like white can take the d5 pawn. But then once you start calculating, you realize there's going to be a rook c1 check at the end of the line. And so to me, I thought, okay, the pawn's not hanging. That would be a big blunder to take. And my opponent also thought that. He just goes back bishop d4. Because it does look like the pawn is poisoned after takes. If queen takes d5, I trade queens and rook c1, and the back rank is lost. And on rook takes d5, it would appear that black has rook c1 check, or at least that's what I was kind of thinking during the game. As it turns out, this is one of those call an ambulance, but not for me positions, because white has rook d1 check. And black is the one that's actually losing. I'm losing the rook on c1. No way to stop the check and defend the rook. It's actually not that hard to calculate. I mean, it's a pretty simple tactic for someone of like 2380 level, but it was just a kind of funny example of mutual blindness, because during the game, I'm not sitting there thinking like, oh my god, I'm about to lose a pawn. I'm very calm, and my opponent can kind of sense my calmness, and so it kind of transfers over to him as well, where he's thinking like, okay, d5 pawn is clearly poisoned. I can't I can't take it. But actually, no, he could have grabbed the pawn and then all of a sudden had a very, very big advantage. I would have to maybe take and try like queen f7 or something just to avoid losing. But I'm just down a very, very healthy pawn here, and white would have nice winning chances. So bishop e5, that was the blunder. I should have just put the bishop on b8 immediately. And then the difference here is on bishop b6, I can go rook e8, and with the rook on the e file, all of the tactics now work for black. Now white doesn't have the same thing, right? Because rook e1 is just checkmate. So okay, if I had found this, then black's position is totally fine. As it turned out, bishop e5, bishop b6 was played. I went rook to c8, bishop d4 back, and now of course I don't want to trade, so bishop b8, intending to go queen d6 and looking to create some counterplay. So bishop e3. Now on queen d6, white can take the d5 pawn and run away with the king. So I go back rook d8, bishop b6, and I could have kind of like repeated the position with rook c8, but somehow intuitively I was like, nah, I think the rook is better on e8. I still didn't realize that on rook c8, knight takes d5 is possible. I thought both moves are fine, but somehow intuitively I was like, let's put the rook on e8. It just somehow feels more active here. And here, okay, again, white now cannot take the pawn. He goes back bishop e3. Otherwise, like queen d6, and this is another reason why I wanted the rook on the e file to kind of help threaten some possible mates. So he goes back, and he doesn't really have anything better than just repeating the position. And we end up making a draw here by repetition. And I thought actually this was pretty logical because neither side has a way to really play for more. Like for me, my pawn is weak. I have to make sure it's defended. And from white's point of view, they don't really have a way to kind of make progress in this position because I'm always threatening to go either queen d6 or play for some d4 somewhere, queen c7, queen c6, and yeah, white really has to make sure to keep black's initiative at bay here. So kind of a balanced end to the game. Of course, we both kind of blundered that this d5 pawn was hanging. But other than that, pretty interesting game. I was again kind of miffed with my move rook c8 back here. more than the tactical blunder, just because I felt like we got ourselves into very unnecessary difficulties here after takes and rook c8. But yeah, what can you do? I felt in the end the draw was a pretty fair result, so I was more or less okay with the game.